Hey there, my friends. I am interested. This is a sort of a dual purpose video. So part of it is introducing the concept of bone reading to potential clients, and part of it is for those of you that are interested in divination and watch my channel. So this is going to be on the Etsy shop for folks who are interested in learning how this works, or abbreviated version of it anyway, and then also for my YouTube channel. So this is the thing that I've been exploring for a while, and I'm really excited to bring it to you and just talk about it and share with you my experience with it. So this is one of the, I would say, in my experience, in my learning, one of the oldest forms of divination, and it gets called many different things, but it's essentially casting. What you're casting is going to depend on, a lot of different things: your culture, your location, your life experience, your spiritual practice, etc. And so this is a very, again, it like predates cards, it predates coins even, because what you're casting really can be any number of things. And there's a lot of history here. It's a really fascinating history. I've taken a couple classes on this topic. I've read some books, and like all things, I lay that groundwork and then go off and sort of find my way into it. So before I get into kind of how the reading works and how I prepared my kit, etc., I just want to share a few resources with you that I think are going to be helpful if you're interested in doing this yourself. Let's start here. So for me, the best resource that you can get if you want to learn this right now is a book called Bones, Shells, and Curios, A Contemporary Method of Casting the Bones, written and illustrated by Michelle Jackson. It's a very brief book, but it's quite good. So it is a modern adaptation of ancient practices, and it is not a culturally specific one that Michelle Jackson presents here. There are culturally specific practices that I would avoid if you weren't a member of that community. You'll sometimes hear this style of reading in the United States, particularly on websites that are marketing bone reading kits, as Sangoma style bone reading, but that's not true. That is a very particular form of divination. It is a diagnostic form of divination, and it is, I don't like the term closed practice because I think things are more complicated than that. I know that's a phrase people hate, but I think in this case it's true. But in the case of like Sangoma style bone reading, that is a specific cultural, diagnostic, spiritual, and medicinal tool. So when you see that, if you're shopping for like a starter kit, I would avoid anything that suggests that. This is not that. This is a sort of modern, purpose-driven approach. So this book, I think, is really good. Like I said, it's brief. It is, but it's illustrated, and you don't need a lot of foundational knowledge because this is a deeply, individualized method of reading. But this will give you a great vision into sort of how to start working with it. I mentioned I'm taking classes. There's a local shop. Well, not local to me. It's a couple hours from me. It's just outside Salem, Mass. Spiritus Arcanum. They do an online class, and the teacher of that class recommended as part of kind of the not like required reading, but just recommended reading this book. Now, before I talk about why I'm recommending this to you, I'm imagining it's the same reason that my teacher did. It is, where was I going? I lost my train of thought. Let me contextualize this, I think is what I was saying. So this is a book called Along an African Border, Angolan Refugees and Their Divination Baskets by Sonia Silva. This is an American writer doing sort of anthropology in Africa about Angolan refugees. The thing that I want to say about that, when you're looking at anything anthropological, is that it's riddled with, white gaze. And there are even scholars who have criticized, like Zora Neale Hurston, of privileged gaze, maybe. although I would say Zora Neale Hurston understood something that most people don't, which is that to understand something, you have to live it. And so when you read Zora Neale Hurston's reporting on, Black and African American spiritualism and magic, she didn't just come in and say, "Oh, what are you doing?" She was initiated and she went through the thing. This author doesn't do that, and this is very academic. But why I'm recommending this to you is because we in the United States, in particular, those of us with privilege and resources, financial resources, really have a very kind of casual relationship to divination. We see a deck, we buy it. There's not really, beyond the monetary cost for our divination tools, there isn't often an emotional cost or a life cost, an expense beyond sort of dishing out the money. And for some of us, that, the financial cost is real as well. Like, I'm not dismissing that. But I'm saying what you understand when you read this is that there are places in the world where divination is such a serious act that it is a personally expensive, not just financially expensive action, and that it's not necessarily approached with a kind of TikTok casualness. And, when you sort of read the stories of these diviners who are doing a kind of casting, you understand, and it makes you, I think, appreciate that throughout much of history, divination was not a casual act. It wasn't something you just did, or you picked up and called yourself an expert at. When we go back in time through history, you hear stories of root workers and conjure people and magicians and spiritualists and their doctor, Dr. Buzzard, professor, etc. That's not just a nickname. If they called you Dr. Buzzard, it's because you were doing doctoring. You weren't just I hate to say this because I call myself a fortune teller. You weren't just a fortune teller. Your divination was diagnosing spiritual and physical ills, suggesting spiritual and physical cures and interventions. So this is also stuff that comes out of communities in the United States anyway that were frequently impoverished or didn't have access to medical care or didn't trust doctors. And there's plenty of reasons why throughout history all of that would be true. But to become a doctor in that way, to become a diviner, wasn't as simple as just taking a class and throwing out your shingle. You know what I mean? And it's still the case in many parts of the world where this is the case. And what's also, I think, important about that is it often was something someone might dread having, to become, because of what it meant for you as a person to sort of have to live on the edges of society even further than you would be in a marginalized group, to be at the mercy of spirits and deities who come a knockin' when maybe you're not in the mood. You separate yourself from life to do this. You are both loved and hated for doing it. And so, anyway, this is kind of a long-winded way of saying, here's why, or here's a book that's going to show you what that is really like, what that experience is really like. Anthropologically, it's very, privileged gaze. The other reason I like this book for this particular example is because this writer isn't telling you how to do it. Again, this is another practice that is specific to this geography and this community, a diaspora that is displaced thanks to colonization, in this case, Dutch colonization. Again, I think it just makes you, or should make you, just view your divination with a little bit less casualness. I'm not, if you know me around here, you know that, I like that a lot of forms of divination or games. I don't take myself too seriously, but I take the work seriously, and I think this is worth reading. and it was recommended to me, and I recommend it with the caveat of recognizing what sort of graduate or doctorate or postdoctorate thesis work tends to do, which is objectify it in a way that's not realistic. But I think, this is decent, and again, it doesn't betray the secrets. This is not an instruction manual. This is a reportage of a group of people who have been displaced through colonization and war that features heavily in divination. So, again, Along an African Border by Sonia Silva. So those are two books that I would recommend if you want to sort of build a foundation for yourself, if you're curious. The anthropological book, this one's more expensive. It was a little harder to find because it is an academic work. This one is not very expensive. It's about $10. It's a Lucky Mojo book. There's people who have mixed feelings about Lucky Mojo, but this particular book is good stuff. So let me just talk a little bit about, so you've been looking at this for a while. Let me just talk about this. So this is a kind of reading cloth. So what I've prepared for myself is this tray with some walls so that things don't go flying everywhere because I'm klutzy. That can be a part of reading, that things go flying out, but I don't want things to go flying everywhere. And then, so the course I took came with a kit and a class to start with, and it just had sort of a solar cross and a circle, and that was fine, but I didn't like the way it looked for some reason, and I just wanted something that was specific. So I designed, using Laura Tempest-Zarkoff's sigil book. I really should know better than to do things. Anyway, I'm getting down on myself. This book, by Laura Tempest-Zarkoff, Sigil Witchery, has a great system for designing sigils. A word, I don't know, that feels sort of uncomfortable to me. I have a lot of discomfort with kind of magical language and witchy stuff, but that's just me. Anyway, I found this really useful. It's a quick read. It's very, very helpful, and even if you're not an artist, you can come up with a sort of appropriate symbol for a specific working. And this is that. I'm not going to describe to you how I did it or what it means, but it does have a very specific intent and meaning. And the idea behind it being, rather than just a reading cloth, that I created something that was specific to my aims as a diviner, the work that I do, and what I hope for my clients. This is just a piece of flannel. And then this is an iron-on transfer that I got on Etsy. So that I sent them the files, but I fucked it up by doing it the way that I do things, which is poorly. Sorry, I'm getting down on myself. I'm actually in a bad mood today, not feeling great, so I don't know why I'm doing this now, but anyway. So anyway, this is what I did. So I created this reading cloth. I have another transfer so I can fix what happened here, which was that the iron ripped off the transfer once it had been transferred. So there should be another, binky here. But anyway. So I really like the way it came out. Other than that, I'm very happy with what I did. And it doesn't really mean much in terms of the way that I read. It can. But what I'm really looking at really are the directions in particular. So there's very specific systems in terms of the association of the directions with the elements, etc., and the seasons. I have evolved mine over the years to something that is both easy for me to remember because it makes the most sense to me. So for me, north is winter and air. East is water and spring. South is summer and fire. And then west is autumn and earth. And honestly, that is a purely geographical to where I live on the planet. The water is to my east and the earth is to my west, right? The North Pole, the winter is above, the summer, South Pole is below, and then the associations with the elements are just the ones, or with the elements make sense to me. Air, winter, north, east, water, spring, summer, south, fire, and west, earth, and autumn. So designed this. This is actually a relatively inexpensive setup, this thing. Because you can buy a remnant, that's about a yard square, and then this transfer that I had made cost me about $5 or $6 on Etsy, and I got 2 of them because I knew I would make a mistake, because I always do. And then let's see the goodies. So what I'm going to do is just, I guess I'm going to throw and just talk a little bit about like what's in here and why. I'm not going to go through every piece, but I'll just sort of share. And that's literally how you cast. You just, however you want to do it, but you just drop everything out onto your reading cloth. And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see why having walls in a tray is very useful for me. So things that I would look at like as I'm reading are, things that fall on the periphery, particularly outside of the circle. Those things either may be quiet or not active. They say they're not speaking, or they are peripheral. And one thing that I see happening with a lot of readings I've done is actually the significator pieces will exist on the periphery, which tells me people have decentered themselves in their own life. So just so, I'm not going to go through every piece. There's a lot of them here. I don't even know how many I've got, but some key pieces here. This brown chess piece represents the querent. So that might be me if I'm reading for myself, or whoever I'm reading for. And so things I'm going to look at are sort of like where it's facing. It's never going to land up like that. It could, but it's never done that. Is it facing into the reading? Is it facing away from the reading? Is it upside down? And I'm also going to look at some things like that are positioned near it, like what's near its head. So that's one piece that is important. Another piece that's important is the white chess piece, which represents any opposition, something other or opposing forces or energies. So I'm going to basically look at the relationship between these two, frequently. So sometimes it really is an opposition, an enemy. Sometimes it's just, and many times I found it's them. It's the person I'm reading for, just in another context, or often they're their own enemy. So that's what these two things are. I could, if this were specific to a relationship reading, make this the person that they're in a relationship with, for example, or the object of their affections, say. What else is in here that's interesting? So it's called bone reading. There's going to be some bones in it, and there are some animal bones in here. This is a scapula bone from a raccoon. And there's a lot of traditions. There's a lot of different ways of doing this. And this is why I think it's a very personal system, because it has to make sense to you. And so what this shoulder bone says to me is what's on this person's shoulders. And there's a plus side and a negative side. And so that'll tell me whether, if it's face up on the plus side, whether this is a good burden or a bad burden, a heavy burden or a light burden. So there's a shoulder bone there from a raccoon. We've got a neck bone. So this gives me a little bit of a sense of something similar. So usually things that are on the neck bone are sort of weighing on somebody, again, or holding them up. If you think about what bones do and what they're for, that's kind of how you read. So here's a jawbone. This is a little tiny jawbone. I can zoom in some more. And again, I have a plus and a minus on it. And this is what is being said. This is communication. Maybe what's being consumed, because a jaw is how we talk, communicate, make sounds, but it's also how we eat. So there's a jawbone in there. What other bones are in here? This is a pelvis bone. And so this is going to suggest kind of sexuality, sex, that part of your like root or sacral chakras. So there's that. We've got, what other bones are in here? So there are these long bones, and these are just actually, they kind of serve as bridges or pointers or separators. So sometimes you'll see in a reading, like here, this is dividing this cluster from that cluster. And so just like theoretically, there is a wall between these two people, right? So, but it could also serve as a bridge, like between this, if it fell like this, it would be a link between this other person and what is down here, which is, this is a door. So this is a little charm that I found, and it's literally a door that opens. And what I like about that is sometimes in a reading, the door will be open or closed. I think there's even a little magnet in here. So sometimes in a reading, the door will be open or closed, and that's interesting. If it's face down, that's interesting. Another similar thing is this treasure chest. And again, I think about that literally. Like, what does a treasure chest indicate? Sorry, it's kind of chaotic for the camera. So a little treasure chest, again, it opens, it's just a charm, but a lot of times it falls open and it'll fall empty. So that tells me something. Or something will fall into it. So like here's a little hummingbird, whoops, that, is frequently in there. And so, that may say you're spending your money too quickly, for example. The hummingbird gives me speed. That's why that's there. Other natural elements in here is a claw. And what does a claw do, right? A claw sticks, it grabs, it's a thorn in your side, so that's another natural thing that's in here. I'm going to start moving stuff around. This is a shark's tooth. And so again, what does the tooth do? It will sink into things, it will chew things. What are you chewing on, for example, or what are you consuming again? There's this broken star, which I'm going to get replaced. Things will break, and this is an example of that. So this broke almost immediately. It's a bumblebee jasper, I think is what my friend told me. And it just, based on the size of it, it smashed kind of immediately. I've left it in here, but the star for me kind of works like the star in Lenormand as a directional. So what I found like a vintage compass that I'm going to use for that. Just like a really sort of tarnished penny. This is obviously going to represent finances. There's a toe bone here. That's going to be your feet, where you're walking, where you're going, or things that ground you, things that are pulling you down, or earthy. There's this little walnut shell that's been sort of preserved and shellacked. That's an indication of your brain for me. But I've also got this head, this doll head. And the doll is sort of like, so this is what you're thinking, or maybe what you should be thinking about. This is where your head actually is, right? So like if your head is over here out of the picture, like you're not even in your own reading. But then like here's this little bell, right? So if this doll head and this bell, what do bells do? They alert us. So this is kind of like a warning or an indication of something to pay attention to. I've got these doll arms and legs, and they sort of do what arms and legs do. Arms reach, so these are like you're reaching for things, your goals. Your legs take you places, and so this is sort of reaches. Well, the arms reach for or grasp for. So what these are directed at are usually things desired. This is usually where you're going, actions to take, etc., because your legs carry you places. For those of us whose legs do that. Other things in here, there's a cinnamon stick, and a cinnamon stick is warm, it's spicy, and so that's going to give me indication of things that are warm and spicy, or it can suggest bark on a tree, so like a protective shell, because that's what cinnamon is. There's a rose hip here. And that indicates just things it's like a rose, right? It's sort of giving rose. And so it can indicate things that we feel good about, things that we care about, things we love. There's a little bone skull. And this, a lot of folks would say that this sort of represents death or endings. I think skulls are really beautiful. I love skulls. They are a protective, sort of magical thing that protects our brains. And so this is usually a positive thing. It's your structure, it's your ability to sort of stand up to the elements. It can also kind of represent ancestral stuff. And so can this little cardinal. Cardinals are often associated with ancestors. And so when I see this in placements and readings, it can suggest family histories, recurring, things, advice from maybe your ancestors, etc. I already showed you the bone. This is a lodestone. And so lodestones are natural magnets. And so this is going to suggest anything that you're drawing to you, anything you're attracted to, etc. This is pyrite, it's fool's gold. And this sort of stands in for gold, so things that are valuable. But in some readings, it also suggests the idea of like fool's gold, where it's something that seems valuable but isn't really. This is an embossing stamp, and I use this to sort of indicate putting your signature on things or your identity. And also there's a passport, and that signifies identity. A bird cage, things that are stuck. And this actually opens up too, but it doesn't really open up in readings. So like oftentimes if this is near your significator, or it's near that doll's head, it'll tell me like someone's stuck in their head, for example. This is a snake vertebrae, and if you think about how snakes move, so it signals fluidity, but also your spine. I've got some antique dominoes in here, and I look at these in a couple ways, depending on the context of the reading. So one is odd-numbered and one is even, so that's interesting to me. But also, these indicate play, games, And I find a lot of times they fall upside down, in which case I don't really pay much attention to them. This is a pen. It's literally just a working fountain pen, but it's nice and small. And so I use this for communication and creativity. As a writer, this is sort of indicative of creativity. I've got a little dinosaur here to represent things that are extinct, and I've got a panda here to represent things that might be going extinct. A Job's tear for sadness. There's a key that would behave much like Lenormand, and so it's, what's the solution? I have this jack-o'-lantern to represent things that we're scared of or that we might be scaring away. A teapot, literally just spilling the tea. What's the truth here? So you can see why this is personal, because this isn't a thing that a prescribed kit. Like, you need things in here that make sense to you. I've got an old set of earbuds. What are you listening to? I've got this desert rose, and this sort of suggests sort of blooming in place or thriving in places where maybe you wouldn't normally. A mushroom to sort of indicate fantasies. Sun, which behaves much like the sun in Lenormand for me. This little piggy bank, this crucifix. And then I've got really some household objects here. This is a screwdriver, an Allen wrench. I've got some buttons. So, these are tools, and they behave like tools. They are fixes or techniques. A nail holds things down or locks things in place. A cell phone for communication. I talked about the earbuds. Scales. I've got a blue ribbon. A hand, again, sort of for reaching. Oh, this is a broken piece of the star. A spider for stories. Spiders weave stories. It also could suggest predatory things, but for the most part, it's stories. Buttons. What do buttons do? They fasten. They fix. Lips for things we're saying. A heart, literally, for that. A cork. What's a cork for? Stopping things up. This is a charger. So, recharging your battery. This is actually a charger for a vape pen. A memory card. What's a memory card for? Storage. Memories. Things like that. There's a ring here, which would behave much like, the ring in Lenormand, commitment, circles. This actually happens to be a mood ring, which I think is funny. Although I may replace this at some point with a little bit more of a fine, precious thing. I have this little gun in here, which is what I actually use to represent endings. This bracelet is interesting. It didn't do that when I threw it out, but a lot of times, most of the time, what happens is things will fall into that bracelet when I cast. And so that's it's literally like circling something. Pay attention to these things. So, you build your kit, an arrowhead for pointing at things, but also for combat and conflict. This is like a rainbow, LGBTQ heart that I got at work, but I threw it in there. Some of these things were sort of... this keeps happening to me lately, but I ran out of tape. Or memory card, ironically. So, yeah, I'll wrap this up because I don't have that much time left on this card either. Some of these came in a kit like this. I think this is galangal root, if I'm not mistaken. And it's really just a root, and that's what I use it to represent. So though galangal roots have specific attributions. In this case, it's really just behaving as a root. Whereas this nutmeg is traditionally associated with good luck, with gambling. It's also testicular, and so it can represent sort of masculine things. That's another part of this too, is that using sort of animism and syncretism. What's a thing that looks like something else behaves that way. And so you could take this, which is sort of more phallic, and say that represents something penile, whereas this pelvis bone, this is not a penis bone. There are penis bones in a lot of kits. This is not one of those. This is a pelvis bone, but it's open, and so this sort of might represent more feminine spirituality. I don't like to gender my readings that way, but you could do that. But it's really just about finding things that make sense, right? So I've got a squirrel. These are squirrels gather, right? They collect, and there's an acorn. So that is the thing collected. I have a rabbit, both for fertility and again, rapidity. An elephant, sort of representing loyalty. Butterflies for transformation. Like all of these things. I spent a lot of time actually going to New Agey shops, looking on Etsy, going to Michael's even, which is where a lot of the things that I couldn't find anywhere else, weirdly, the craft store wound up being like super helpful, strangely. Other things are just stuff that were around the house, and that's kind of what you do. And really, I don't think you should spend a lot of money doing this. You should sort of start with things that are around the house. There are many places on Etsy that will sell starter kits for bones, and that's not a bad place to start. But I think what's better is if you can find some of the Etsy shops where they will work with you to select what you want. The question always comes up about, ethical sourcing. That is a hard thing to talk about because someone can tell us bones are ethically sourced, but, what is ethical? You can't get a bone from a live animal, right? You don't have to have bones in the kit, but it's traditional. You can get them yourself from a chicken that you cook. You can wild forage, just be careful about, what you're... Oh, I don't even have my... Oh, God, I've been talking without my microphone on.